So Nietzsche argues that if we look at the history of the development of our moral terms and the concepts behind those moral terms, we're going to see that our moral concepts actually developed from terms that denoted the goodness of power and strength and warlike conquest, and that slowly then inverted into its complete opposite, which then glorified the goodness of giving up power and becoming a servant and being a minister and so forth. So he's going to look at it in three strands. We're going to look at it in one more with Chinese. So let's take a look first of all at the Germanic strand, which includes English, which itself has a very close relationship to German. Both of them are Germanic languages. So if we look at the word gut in German, that's the word for good, and everyone realizes that gut and Gott, which means God, are related to each other. They're cognate terms. And what's interesting, though, is that this word Gott in ancient German, in archaic German, could be spelled as Goth. And who were the Goths? That was the warrior-like barbarian tribe that was famous for both its barbarism and its bravery and its warlike prowess. And the Goths were the name that they called themselves. And it meant, like Gott and Gut, godlike. And so thus the word good and Gott comes from a word for godlike one who is so strong, he's like a god over all that he dominates. And thus the word good is defined originally from the idea of the powerful ones who have conquered the others. You can see this in its opposite. Often, by looking at opposite terms, they interdefine each other. How do I know what good is? By defining what bad is. If I understand the meaning of bad, then good will be the opposite of that, and vice versa. So the argument, Nietzsche said, is strengthened by the word for bad in German, which is schlecht. And schlecht is etymologically related to the word schlicht. And schlicht just means common or plain or vulgar in the sense of a peasant. In the sense of everyone who is not a ruler is just a common person, the person who hasn't done anything great. And so thus we see that gut versus schlecht really originally meant noble versus commoner, warrior knight versus serf or peasant farmer. When we look at the word good, we see its German origin. It comes from the word gut. And we see how God, similarly like Gott, is related. And so, thus coming out of the German. The word bad is interesting, though, because it doesn't come out of the German. English is a mongrel language. It brings Germanic elements with Old English or Celtic elements, and also French and Latin and Greek elements. And the word bad actually comes out of Old English. It comes from the Old English word bedel. And bedel literally meant a hermaphrodite. Someone who was neither a man nor a woman. And it was often used as a term of contempt for a defeated warrior or someone who is not good in battle. They were a girly man, a womanish man. So again, we see how the original meanings of these terms in our Germanic and English language comes out of the master. The master looks at his own life and says, this is great, I am happy, I am wonderful. And in the exercise of his power, he then glorifies himself and calls what he is the standard. And then anything that's not him, that's bad. Again, we see a similar evolution in Latin and Greek. In Greek, we have the word for good as agathos or kalos. Kalos, I didn't write on here, but literally means beautiful. So the beautiful one, the good-looking one. And agathos comes from the word that was used in early Homer for the highborn, the noble one, the one who is therefore gentle and brave and most of all powerful and capable. Not only did the early Greek nobles call themselves the agathoi, the great ones, but they also called themselves the estlioi, or the truthful ones, or the true ones. Nietzsche argues this comes from the earlier versions of the Greek word for being, or is, or to be, and thus they're the only ones who are the true ones, the real McCoy, the Rolexes rather than the knockoffs is one way to look at it. And in contrast to this are the lying ones. Now, why is truthfulness a sign of power? Well, think about it. If you and I are in a love-hate relationship with each other, we don't like each other. You could care less about me, but I hate you. Here's the problem. If I'm not powerful enough to beat you up, I'm not going to let you know I hate you. I'm going to lie to you. I'm going to be polite to you. I'm going to be subservient to you because I don't have the power to back up my truth. But the person who is strong can afford to be honest, right? And so thus, the more strength you have, the less need of despicableness, of lying that you need. And the Greeks even use this as an argument as why the gods have to be truthful. They can never lie. This was Plato in the Republic. He argues that since God is perfect in power, he has no need of lying. Any form of lying is a sign of powerlessness, of slavery and despicableness, of lowliness. And so therefore, the truthful and the true are the strong, aren't they? They're the honorable. And in contrast to them are the kakoi, the lowly, the lying, the cowardly, the deiloi. And thus, all grouped together, in contrast, strength, power, truthfulness, honor, versus weakness, lowliness, despicableness, lying, and treachery. We see this confirmed actually in the Chinese tradition, in the evolution of the Chinese language, which is very interesting because Nietzsche didn't know Eastern languages like this, but it's very well confirmed. So, for example, the major words in Chinese for good is the word zen. Okay. And its cognate is the word for human, zen, pronounced the exact same way. Now, what's interesting is this is an ideogram, which means it's not an alphabet. These are symbols. Here is a man who is standing, and this is the number 2, or 2 people who are lying down. So the idea behind this is the zen, the person who is zen, truly human, is the person who has conquered his enemies and is the last one standing, and his enemies are under his feet. If you think about, for example, ancient bas reliefs of Assyrian kings and their conquering of their enemies, they would stand like Captain Morgan over them, where their foot would be over the neck of their enemy. And that is this symbol. Very interesting. We see confirmation of this in the Book of Odes, which is called the Shijing in Chinese. And in the Book of Odes, we have the oldest fragments of Chinese literature and poetry. And in one of those, a woman is writing a poem in praise of her lover, and she calls him Ren, which in that sense means someone who's handsome and powerful, a conqueror, a hero, my knight in shining armor, you might say. But what happens is, as Confucius comes around and the Chinese Empire grows weaker during his time, Confucius completely transforms this term. So now it no longer means, by the time of his disciple Mengzi, or as we call him Mencius, no longer means this at all. It now becomes the symbol or the central term for the truly good person. And that truly good person is a person who has compassion, as Mengzi would say. This is the person who would rescue the baby that's falling in the well and Their central virtue is benevolence and humanity. They're the person who is merciful and compassionate. Quite the opposite. Now, this term, Jin, was originally in classical Chinese just a term for the prince or the king, the ruler, the one, again, who had power and dominance. And by the time of Confucius, he transforms this term to the idea of the nobleman. And you notice the similarity in English. In English, we have this idea of the noble, and originally it just meant someone who was in the high-born caste, right? Someone who is a knight or a lord. They're a noble. But then we came to talk about the person who has noble-like qualities. You see this? Noble-like qualities means what? Someone who's like a nobleman, like a high-born, powerful person, who has honor, and thus nobility becomes a moral term. That's what happens here with this term. Jin is the nobleman by the time of Confucius, the person who has virtue, who is the superior man, but that virtue is transformed into the person who is polite and virtuous, a gentleman. Again, notice the similar transition in the word gentleman in English from that which describes someone of the highborn caste to simply someone who is a polite person. So, from all of these strands of the major world cultures and the languages that undergird them, we see this radical transformation. It's so radical that the terms originally meant just the opposite of what they meant, and they still mean today. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to show how Nietzsche argues that this master morality was a healthy morality, a morality that was life-affirming, and that the slave morality is a morality that comes and is invented by the slaves from their perspective of the master morality. And it's revolt against it, and it's a revolt that's based not on truth and health and life, but on treachery, lying, rationalization, obsessive hatred. And it's a transformation of values that conquers the world's master moralities in such a way that it destroys or holds the potential for destroying any future development of human greatness.